I woke up in the early hours of the morning to use the bathroom and accidentally overheard my husband whispering messages to his mistress. "Don't worry, baby. Tomorrow, this 7,500 square foot estate will be all yours." At lunchtime, my mother-in-law received a call from the hospital. Her son had been in a fatal car crash. My in-laws froze in shock. If I hadn't heard it with my own ears, I probably would have believed until my dying breath that my husband was a decent man. But that night, amidst the dead silence of our massive estate, I heard his voice. "Don't worry, my love. I'll make sure she dies. The house and all the money in the bank. As soon as I take care of her, it'll all be yours." The man saying those words was my husband. My name is Ellen. I was 32 years old and worked as an accountant for a mid-sized firm in the city. My husband, Jason, was 3 years older and owned his own tech consulting business. Things were going incredibly well for him. We had been married for 5 years and lived with his parents in a sprawling mansion in a wealthy suburb of Westchester County, New York, complete with expansive lawns, a pool, and a 3-car garage. Anyone looking from the outside would say I had hit the jackpot. I had married a successful man from a wealthy family. My father-in-law, Arthur, was a stern man of few words, but each one carried the weight of a gavel. My mother-in-law, Carol, was a petite woman, but her tongue was sharp, always finding something to complain about. In 5 years of marriage, the only thing that made me lower my head in front of her was the topic of children. We didn't have any. Carol would often drop heavy hints. "What kind of woman are you? 5 years married and not a single child. At this rate, the family bloodline will end. You should really get that checked out, Ellen." I could only grit my teeth, force a smile, and cry silently at night, clutching my pillow. I had tried countless fertility treatments, visited one specialist after another in Manhattan, and the result was always the same. "We don't see any underlying issues. Just keep trying." I blamed myself entirely, never daring to think the problem might not be with me. In that house, the person I feared most was my father-in-law. The one who drained me most was my mother-in-law. And the one I trusted most was my husband, Jason. Or at least, so I thought. That night, I was sleeping when thirst woke me up. I reached out to the other side of our king-size bed and found only a cold emptiness. The sheets on Jason's side were smooth, devoid of any warmth. I rubbed my eyes and glanced at the glowing digital clock on the nightstand. 3:10 a.m. The house was pitch black. The only sound was the steady hum of the central air conditioning. I threw off the covers, slipped on my slippers, and headed downstairs to the kitchen for a glass of water. The second-floor hallway was long and dark, with a dim, yellowish nightlight in the corner casting a faint glow. As I passed Jason's home office, I noticed a thin sliver of bluish light seeping out from under the door. Was he still working? That was my first thought. His company had a major contract coming up, and he often complained about being exhausted. Seeing him pull an all-nighter, I just wanted to tell him to rest, not to work himself into the ground. I raised my hand to knock, the words already forming on my lips. "Honey, come downstairs, have some water and get some sleep." But my hand never touched the brass doorknob. From inside, his familiar, deep voice echoed. But it carried a sickly sweet tone he had never used with me. "Don't worry, my love. Tomorrow, everything will be sorted out. After tomorrow, there will be no one standing in our way." I stopped dead in my tracks, my hand paralyzed in the air. My love? Who is he calling my love? My heart hammered against my ribs, and a cold chill crawled up my spine to the nape of my neck. I swallowed hard, held my breath, and slowly pressed my ear against the cold wood of the door. Jason's voice sounded again, lower this time, laced with dark satisfaction. "I have it all figured out. On that mountain pass up in the Catskills, if it rains even a little, the car will hydroplane easily. The state troopers will think it was an accident, loss of control. No one will suspect a thing." My hands and feet went numb. The Catskills, a mountain pass, an accident. Tomorrow was our 5th wedding anniversary. He had told me he was taking me to a luxury spa resort in the upstate mountains, a lodge with views of the pine forests, to make up for the years of heartbreak over our fertility struggles. I, happy to the point of tears, had packed heavy coats and scarves, and had even told my mother-in-law, "Mom, we're going away for a couple of days. Take care of yourselves and don't forget your meds." It turned out this anniversary celebration was actually my planned funeral. Inside, A woman's voice drifted through the phone's speaker, low but clear, with a coquettish whine. But what if she doesn't die? I'm scared, Jason. I don't want to go to prison. Jason chuckled. It was the same confident laugh he reserved for corporate boardrooms, but now it sounded incredibly sinister. Silly. I've done the math. In that ravine, if the SUV goes over, it'll be crushed. Impossible to survive. Once she's dead, the 7,500 square foot estate, and the millions of dollars in the accounts under my name. I'll transfer it all to you. You just have to wait quietly to become my wife. You promised me, right? Don't play games with me. The woman on the other end giggled. Every single word, the estate, the millions, all for you, felt like an ice pick driving through my chest. To my husband, I was just a hurdle. The home I meticulously cared for, scrubbing every marble tile and tending to the gardens, was just a dollar amount on a spreadsheet. 5 years of being the dutiful daughter-in-law, swallowing insults, only to end up as the target of a perfect plot to push me off a cliff. I clamped both hands over my mouth, terrified I might scream. My back hit the doorframe. Inside, Jason whispered again. I'll slip her a mild sedative tomorrow morning. By the time we hit the mountain pass, she'll be half asleep. When it happens, it'll look even more like a tragic accident. Just remember, no digital footprint on your phone. Understood? Be a good girl, stay home, and wait for me to bring you the papers to sign. I couldn't listen anymore. If I stayed, my legs would give out. My knees buckled, and I slid down the cold wall, sitting heavily on the hallway runner. The carpet was plush, but it felt like I was sitting on razor blades. My mind spun with flashing images. Our wedding day at the Plaza Hotel, him holding my hands, looking into my eyes, vowing, I will never abandon you. The times my stomach cramped from the hormone injections, and he brought me warm tea, saying, one last push, sweetheart, soon we'll have a baby. The nights I waited up for him until 2 a.m., and he hugged me, apologizing. Late client dinner, don't be mad. Was any of it real, or was it all just a prolonged, twisted performance? In this house, the person I resented and feared the most had always been Carol. Because of her passive-aggressive jabs and judgmental stares at my flat stomach, I often thought, if I ever leave this house, it'll be because of you. But as it turned out, the person who literally wanted to erase me from the earth was the man I slept next to every night and had breakfast with every morning. I don't know how long I sat on the hallway floor. The hum of the AC and the ticking of the grandfather clock downstairs seemed to amplify, stabbing at my eardrums. In the office, the light stayed on a while longer before switching off with a sharp click. I heard a chair scrape and familiar footsteps approaching the door. Like a drowning victim suddenly grasping for air, I scrambled back to the master bedroom. My movements were clumsy. I nearly tripped over my own feet, but I managed to crawl into bed, pull the duvet over my shoulders, and face away from the door. The bedroom door opened with a soft click. I heard Jason's footsteps, slow and calm, just as always. The memory foam mattress sank beside me. The faint smell of scotch mixed with his expensive cologne drifted toward my back. His arm reached out, preparing to pull me into his chest, like he always did. My entire body went rigid. Every muscle twitched. Ellen, you awake? His voice was smooth, a little raspy. I forced myself to swallow the massive lump in my throat, faking a groggy, sleep-heavy voice. I was thirsty. Got up to use the bathroom. Going back to sleep now. You should sleep too. Jason stayed silent for a second, then pulled his arm back. Yeah, we're leaving early tomorrow. Get some rest. He rolled over, his back to me. Minutes later, his breathing grew deep and rhythmic, as if he were truly, peacefully asleep. I, on the other hand, lay in the dark with my eyes wide open, staring at the faint moonlight bleeding through the gaps in the blackout curtains. My body was freezing, yet my mind had never been sharper. The mountain pass, the accident, the sedatives, the estate, the millions. Wait for the papers. Every word Jason had spoken, every giggle from that woman, was branded into my brain with a hot iron. I couldn't even cry anymore. The initial tears had soaked my pillow, and as they dried, only a chilling, hollow sensation spread through my chest. A profound hatred and a painful clarity. I used to think that if I couldn't take it anymore, I'd just divorce him. Walk away empty-handed. But walk away. I never imagined someone would deny me the simple right to live. Outside, the sky began to lighten, shifting from deep purple to pale gray, kissed by the first golden rays of the morning. A robin chirped faintly out on the lawn. I stayed completely still, faking sleep so I wouldn't have to look at the face of the man who planned my murder. Only when a crystal-clear thought formed in my mind did my muscles finally relax. I will go on that trip today, but I will not die. I will survive, I will protect myself, and I will make them pay for every single thing they planned against me. That thought was a tiny flame igniting in the endless night, thawing my frozen heart. I didn't know what would happen on that mountain road today, but I knew that from the moment I heard that conversation, the submissive, resigned Ellen was dead. I would live, and I would take back what was mine, my way. The next morning, I couldn't remember if I had slept at all. I only know that when the iPhone alarm chimed, my head felt heavy, stuffed with cotton, yet strangely hyper-alert. Beside me, Jason was still lying there, eyes closed, breathing evenly. If I hadn't overheard last night, I probably would have rolled over and kissed him awake, just like 1,000 other mornings. Today, I just slipped out of bed silently, careful not to shift the mattress. I locked myself in the master bathroom, gripping the edges of the marble vanity. In the mirror, my reflection stared back with sunken, red-rimmed eyes and chapped lips. I looked at myself for a long time, whispering to the stranger in the glass. My phone was still on the nightstand. Last night, in the midst of my panic in the hallway, I somehow had the presence of mind to open the voice memos app and slip the phone into my pajama pocket. When I got back to bed, before faking sleep, I had hit stop. Now, sitting on the toilet lid with shaking hands, I opened the audio file. Jason's voice played, word for word, as clear as if he were whispering right next to me. Once she's dead, the estate and all the money will be yours. I listened to it once, then again. My ears rang, but strangely, my heart settled. It was the proof. I hadn't dreamt it. I hadn't lost my mind. I saved the file into a hidden folder under a random name and sent a copy to Sarah, my best friend since college, via a secure messaging app with one single line. Save this, it's an emergency. Don't ask questions. I'll call you tonight. Sarah replied almost instantly. Done. Saved to my cloud. Are you okay? I stared at those 3 words. Are you okay? For a long time, and finally typed back. Yes, for now. I splashed cold water on my face to bring down the puffiness, clearing my throat so my voice wouldn't shake. When I walked out, Jason was just sitting up, running a hand through his messy hair, faking a sleepy yawn. You're up early, he smiled, using his standard, affectionate tone. We're hitting the road soon to beat the traffic out of the city. I turned so he couldn't read my eyes, keeping my voice flat. Yeah, I'm going to finish packing. No need. I packed everything for us. You just need your toiletry bag. If this were yesterday, I would have swooned. A husband packing for a romantic getaway. Now, I packed everything, just made my skin crawl. I had no idea what he had packed to facilitate my death. I dressed in comfortable clothes and applied light makeup to hide my exhaustion. I opened the walk-in closet and pulled out a cream-colored turtleneck cashmere sweater. The very one Jason once said made me look like I was still in my 20s. I didn't wear it for him. I wore it because today, I needed to be entirely myself, in total control of every detail. When I went down to the kitchen, Carol was already up, barking orders at the housekeeper to serve breakfast. The smell of bacon, pancakes, and dark roast coffee filled the air. Arthur sat at the head of the long mahogany table, eyes glued to the Wall Street Journal, as usual. Seeing me enter, Carol shot me a dismissive glance. You're finally down. Eat something before you go. The traffic heading upstate is going to be a nightmare. I nodded and sat. Jason, coming up right behind me, pulled my chair out and set a plate with perfectly sunny-side-up eggs in front of me. Eat up, honey. It's a long drive. I stared at the eggs, thinking about the sedative he mentioned. My stomach did a flip, but I pasted on a bright smile. You too, babe. Arthur folded his newspaper, took off his reading glasses, and looked at us. What time are you heading out? Jason answered smoothly. Planning to hit the highway by 9, Dad. Arthur nodded, speaking slowly, his tone halfway between advice and a warning. Those mountain roads up in the Catskills are treacherous, especially if it rains. Don't speed. One slip and you'll go straight down a ravine. My fork trembled in my hand. He mentioned the mountain roads, the slipping, the ravine. Was it a coincidence? Or did he know? I shot a sideways glance at Jason's reaction. He just smiled confidently. Relax, Dad. I've been driving for 15 years. I checked the weather app. It's going to be sunny and the roads are bone dry. Don't worry, I'll keep Ellen safe. The word safe echoed in my head like a sick joke. I lowered my eyes, cut a tiny piece of the egg white, and pushed it to the edge of the plate. Then I grabbed a piece of dry toast and dipped it in the yolk. Today, I had to control everything. I didn't know where he hid the drugs, but I swore to myself I wouldn't consume anything that tasted remotely off. After a few bites, I put my fork down and rubbed my stomach. Mom, my stomach's been acting up. I'm going to eat light so I don't get carsick. Carol rolled her eyes, ready to fire off a snarky remark, but catching her husband's stern look, she swallowed it and just sighed. Suit yourself. Just drive safe and come back in one piece. I stood up and told Jason, finish eating. I'm going to grab a few things upstairs. Back in the bedroom, I locked the door. I pulled a small crossbody bag from my drawer and stuffed my phone, passport, some emergency cash, and a small USB flash drive with the audio file I had backed up earlier. I didn't know how this road trip would play out, but I knew I could no longer trust a single soul in this house. Before heading down, I sent another text to Sarah. If I don't call you tonight, open that file and take it straight to the police or a lawyer. Trust no one. The typing bubble appeared, followed by, okay, waiting for your call. I took a deep breath, shoved my phone into my jacket pocket, and walked downstairs. Jason had already loaded the designer luggage into his Range Rover and was waiting by the front door with a dazzling smile. Ready, Elle? Let's go. Yeah, let's go. In the driveway, he opened the passenger door for me with the same chivalry he showed on our wedding day. I sat down, clicked my seatbelt into place, and gave the center console a quick sweep cup holders, a Yeti tumbler, a pack of gum. Whatever he offered me today, I'd have to refuse. The SUV rolled out of the gated driveway and merged onto the main road. The morning sun in New York was already glaring. Jason turned on some soft music, the same acoustic playlist he always used for our road trips, full of romantic ballads. What's wrong? You're awfully quiet, Jason said, glancing at me with a soft smile. Nervous? It's our first trip, just the two of us in a while. I turned and forced a grin. Just a bit tired. Didn't sleep great last night. Don't worry, I'm right here with you. You're going to love this resort. It'll make you forget all our stress. That I'm right here with you, which had been my sanctuary for years, now made me want to vomit. I turned my face toward the window so he wouldn't see the sheer disgust in my eyes. The interstate was clear. Jason drove smoothly, occasionally turning to ask, "Want some water?" I shook my head. No thanks. Don't want to have to stop at rest areas. He didn't push it. A while later, he popped open the glove compartment, pulled out a generic blister pack with 2 white pills, and handed them to me, along with a small bottle of Dasani. These are for motion sickness. A doctor buddy of mine prescribed them. Take them so you don't feel awful when we hit the winding roads. The pills were in an unmarked foil pack. My heart pounded against my ribs. Did you take any? I asked, trying to sound casual. I don't need them. I'm used to the drive, he smiled. You take them. You can sleep for a bit, and by the time we pull in, you'll feel brand new. I pretended to hesitate, then tossed the blister pack into the center console. I'll take them when we get closer to the mountains. If I take them now, I'll wake up groggy. Halfway there, Jason looked at me, and for a split second, I saw something flash in his eyes, something cold and sharp that vanished just as quickly. He smiled again. Whatever you want, babe, just remember to take them before we start climbing. I turned away, hiding my clenched fists in my lap. I knew I couldn't swallow those pills, but I also couldn't refuse them too aggressively. The sun climbed higher, the light growing harsh, and the highway began a slow incline. On either side, lush green hills and dense forests started to appear. In the distance, the silhouette of the Catskill Mountains loomed the very place I had dreamed of escaping to, with the man I loved. Jason turned the volume down and cleared his throat. Ellen, when we hit the pass, if you're tired, recline your seat and sleep. Seriously, I want this trip to be a fresh start for us. A fresh start. He said it with such earnestness that if it weren't for the audio file sitting in my bag, I might have believed him. I didn't answer right away. After a minute, I asked in a nonchalant voice, "Jason, if something ever happened to me, what would you do?" Jason seemed to tense up at the steering wheel, then let out a forced laugh. What kind of morbid question is that? If something happened to you, why would I even want to keep living? Come on, don't say crazy things. I looked at his profile, feeling a profound sense of alienation, like I was sitting next to a complete stranger. The face was familiar, but the soul inside was so rotten I couldn't recognize him. The SUV merged off the interstate onto a smaller, two-lane state highway. A green sign reading Catskill Park 75 miles blurred past. Suddenly, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw the caller ID. Mother-in-law. Why was she calling so soon? I looked at Jason. It's your mom. Should I answer? Go ahead. Put it on speaker, he said, keeping his eyes on the road. I hit accept and tapped the speaker icon. Hey, Mom. It wasn't her usual complaining tone on the other end. It was a choked sob, accompanied by a cacophony of background noise that sounded like a busy ER. Ellen. Is that you? Where are you? Are you with Jason? I flinched. Yes, Mom. We're on our way upstate. We just got out of the city. What's wrong? My mother-in-law's voice shattered. Oh my God. How could this happen? The hospital. They just called me from the hospital. They said my boy. That Jason. He was in a car crash, and he's dead. They told me to come identify the body. Ellen, what is happening? What? I froze. The phone almost slipped from my grasp. Beside me, Jason slammed on the brakes. The heavy SUV screeched, fishtailed slightly, and jerked to a violent halt on the gravel shoulder. We both pitched forward against our seatbelts. He snatched the phone from my hand, his face the color of chalk. Mom, what are you talking about? I'm right here. Who died? What crash? Stop talking nonsense. Carol's wailing grew louder, mixed with the PA system of a hospital. They called me. They gave me his full name, his social, the license plate of the car. They said Jason crashed and the car caught fire. Ellen. Jason. Oh my God. I turned to look at Jason. The veins on his forehead were bulging, and his knuckles were bone white from gripping the phone. A name. A license plate. They were confirming it was Jason, while he sat right next to me in a different car, listening to the news of his own fiery death. In that instant, an icy realization washed over me. His plan to murder me in the mountains had hit a massive snag. The first person declared dead today was him. Jason kept the phone pressed to his ear, his lips trembling. Mom. Listen to me. I'm in the car with Ellen. I didn't crash. Calm down. But on the other side, Carol was completely hysterical, drowned out by medics, shouting in the background. They gave me your full name, the plate number, a car registered in your name. The doctor is waiting for me. I have to go inside. Oh my God. The line went dead. The air inside the Range Rover turned so thick it felt like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over us in the midday sun. The engine idled with a soft purr, but the two of us were turned to stone. Jason slowly turned his head toward me, an expression of utter bewilderment on his face that I had never seen before. Ellen. Did you hear what she said? Who died? I stared at him, feeling an odd mixture of chilling detachment and cruel clarity. I answered slowly. I heard perfectly. She said you died. Jason let out a dry, hacking laugh that caught in his throat. That's insane. I'm sitting right here. How can I be dead? He shoved the gear shift into drive and stomped on the gas. The car lurched off the shoulder, but barely 100 feet later, he slammed the brakes again. His hands began to shake violently, gripping the leather steering wheel so hard I thought it might snap. Impossible. A coincidence like that is impossible. I watched his profile, my heart icy. The man who calmly mapped out my death in a ravine last night was now hyperventilating at the news of his own. A thought crystallized in my mind. Someone had beaten him to the punch. Either the woman on the phone or someone else entirely. He forced a wavering voice. Maybe. Mom misunderstood. Maybe it's just someone with a similar name and plate. Yeah, that has to be it. It's a mix-up. Nothing happened to me. But even he didn't look like he believed his own words. Suddenly, his cell phone buzzed. It was an incoming call from an upstate area code. Jason stared at the screen, his hand hovering in the air for a second before he swiped to answer. Hello? A stern male voice spoke. Mr. Jason Miller? This is the attending ER physician at County General. Apologies, but could you come down here immediately? We have a victim from a severe traffic collision, and the vehicle's registration and ID found on the scene are all in your name. Your family just arrived for the identification. Jason went rigid, his voice cracking. That's me. You're talking to me right now. I wasn't in an accident. What the hell are you talking about? The doctor paused, then spoke methodically. We're just following protocol based on the vehicle's registry. The victim suffered catastrophic burns. Visual identification is virtually impossible. The family is insisting the victim is their son. If you are alive, sir, you need to come down here immediately to clear this up. The call ended in a suffocating silence. Jason dropped his phone into his lap, staring blankly through the windshield. His chest heaving as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the cabin. I could clearly see cold sweat beading on his forehead. Ellen. Someone used my car. I looked at him, suppressing a shudder. The crashed car was registered to him. The dead person inside was burned beyond recognition. And at the hospital, his family had already accepted he was dead. Someone had set up a body double for him. At that moment, I remembered the exact words Jason had whispered to that woman. In that ravine, if the SUV goes over, it'll be crushed. Impossible to survive. A perfect plan. Except the person who went over the ravine wasn't me. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice as steady as possible. So, what do we do now? Jason ground his teeth, his face twisting into a mask of pure panic. We turn back, straight to the hospital. I can't let this turn into a reality. He whipped the heavy SUV into a U-turn across the median. The road to the Catskills, the trip we had barely started, was left in the rearview mirror. He floored the accelerator, the V8 engine roaring with urgency. There was no more romantic acoustic music playing, just the hum of the tires and the frantic beating of our hearts. During the drive back toward Westchester, Jason made call after call. He called his mom, but it went straight to voicemail. He called Arthur, but his phone was off. He called his business partner, but the number was unreachable. He even called her the mistress, but only got an automated message saying the phone was out of service. Every unanswered call was a dagger deepening the terror in his eyes. I sat in silence beside him, my mind a whirlwind. Who had killed Jason on paper? Where did the decoy car come from? Who was the dead man? And most importantly, if Jason was legally presumed dead, did his plan to murder me in the mountains still stand? Or had I just been drafted into an even deadlier trap? By the time we pulled into the hospital parking lot, the ER entrance was swarming with paramedics and police. From a distance, I spotted Carol slumped in a plastic waiting room chair, her hair disheveled, sobbing into her hands. Beside her stood Arthur, his face ashen, shoulders sagging under an invisible weight. Jason slammed the car into park, shoved the door open, and sprinted toward them. I followed a few paces behind. "Mom, Dad," he yelled. Carol snapped her head up. The moment she saw Jason standing in the flesh, she froze, looking like she had been struck by lightning. Her eyes went wide. Her lips quivered. Jason? Oh my God!" She stumbled upward and threw her arms around him, weeping violently and pounding his back. "You're alive." "Then who? Who is in there?" Arthur stepped forward, his normally steely eyes bloodshot. He gripped Jason's shoulder, his voice raspy. "If you're out here, it means whoever is in that morgue isn't you." Jason nodded, jaw clenched. "I'm fine, Dad. But it's obvious someone stole my identity and caused a crash in one of the company cars." I hung back, watching the parents cry over their resurrected son. I didn't feel an ounce of warmth, only an expanding, glacial cold. I realized that to them, Jason's life was the center of the universe. I was still just an outsider, an accessory to their family portrait. The ER doctor came out through the double doors, looked at Jason, checked his clipboard, and frowned. "You're Jason Miller?" Jason nodded. The doctor let out a long breath. "Well, then the John Doe in the morgue isn't you. But the vehicle registration, the wallet they pulled from the wreck, It all has your name on it. We're looking at forged documents or a deliberately staged crime scene. Carol collapsed against her husband, wailing. Someone is trying to kill my boy? The doctor didn't answer directly, merely stating that the police had to take over. At the word police, I saw Jason flinch. A shadow of sheer panic crossed his eyes, though he quickly masked it. But I saw it. I knew that if the cops started digging, not only would the fake crash be exposed, but sooner or later, someone would uncover his Mountain Pass murder plot. 2 detectives arrived shortly after. They cordoned off the burnt wreck at the impound lot, took photos, and pulled Jason into a private room for questioning. Before walking in, he turned and locked eyes with me. His gaze was no longer the affectionate husband from the morning, nor the panicked victim in the car. It was cold, calculating. I understood instantly. For him, a game of survival had just begun. While Jason was interrogated, I sat in the fluorescent-lit waiting room with his parents. Carol was still hyperventilating, gripping my hand so tight her nails dug into my skin. Ellen, you saw him. I almost lost my son today. I stared at her, shaking hands, struck by the bitter irony. Last night, the very son she was weeping over had meticulously plotted to throw me off a cliff. But I said nothing. I just patted her hand. Yes, Mom. Everything will get sorted out. At the end of the hall, the morgue doors swung open, and 2 orderlies rolled out a gurney covered in a thick white sheet. Underneath lay the person who had died in Jason's place. I watched the gurney pass, a paralyzing chill washing over me. Who was that? Why did they die like that? Was it connected to the woman on the phone? In that moment, I knew one thing for sure. The moment Jason was declared dead, our fates had derailed. That aborted road trip wasn't the end. It was the catalyst for something much darker. I stared at the closed door of the interrogation room and thought to myself, you wanted me dead in a ravine. Now you're the one fighting for your life. Jason spent nearly an hour with the detectives. When the door finally opened, I looked up and met his eyes. The panic was gone, replaced by a forced, eerie calm, the look of a man trying desperately to regain control of the narrative. Arthur stood up immediately. What happened, son? What did the detectives say? Jason shook his head, his voice strained. Just preliminary questions, Dad. The car was under my LLC. The ID was mine. So they have to vet everything thoroughly. They don't have any answers yet. Carol grabbed his arm. Then who is the dead man? Jason. He looked at the floor for a few seconds before answering. They don't know, Mom. The burns were too severe. They have to wait for dental records or DNA. Hearing that, Carol slumped back into the plastic chair, looking like she had been drained of a pint of blood. I stepped forward to catch her arm. The moment my skin touched hers, I felt a bizarre wave of pity. Pity for a mother terrified of losing her son, completely oblivious that her son was a monster. The detectives advised Jason not to leave the state while the investigation was ongoing. The anniversary trip was officially canceled. Jason drove us back to the Westchester estate. He drove much slower than before, and the silence in the SUV was suffocating. Not a single word was spoken. When we finally pulled into the driveway, the massive house felt like a tomb. As soon as the front door closed, Carol collapsed onto the living room sofa, rubbing her temples and muttering, "Oh God, what is happening? What is all this?" Arthur, leaning against the back of the sofa, told Jason in a gravelly voice, "Go upstairs and rest, son. Your mother is in shock. We'll deal with this tomorrow." Jason nodded and turned to me. "Ellen, you should go lay down too. You must be exhausted." I gave a curt nod and walked past him. When I reached the master bedroom and clicked the lock shut, my legs gave out. I leaned against the heavy oak door and slid down to the hardwood floor. In a single morning, my entire reality had inverted. His plan to murder me hadn't happened because he had been killed by a body double. I realized what I knew was barely the tip of the iceberg. Behind Jason, behind his mistress, there was another player, someone quieter, more ruthless, and willing to kill to get what they wanted. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Sarah. I listened to the audio. "Ellen. Holy shit. Where are you? Are you safe?" I swallowed hard, typing back, "I'm not dead yet. But everything is falling apart. I'll call you tonight. Be careful, Sarah." "This isn't a joke." "I know," she replied instantly. "I'm locking my doors, waiting for your call." I locked my phone and walked into the bathroom. In the mirror, I was still Ellen, but my eyes had changed. I was no longer the gullible, submissive, fearful wife. My gaze was sharp, vigilant. I was changing out of my clothes when there was a soft knock. Ellen? It was Carol. I opened the door. She stood there with swollen eyes, holding a mug of chamomile tea. "Drink this, honey. You haven't eaten all day." I took the mug. "Thanks, Mom." She stared at me for a long time before she suddenly burst into tears again. "Ellen, I almost lost him. I really thought my boy was gone." I stood perfectly still, the hot tea trembling in the mug. "Mom, if the person in that crash today had been me, what would you think?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. Carol froze, blinking away tears, then shook her head. "What are you talking about? You and Jason are husband and wife. It's a tragedy either way. I can't even think about it." Her answer was a masterclass in dodging. I knew the truth. In her heart, her son was the son. Even after 5 years of marriage, I was just a satellite. I'd never be blood. She patted my shoulder. "Just rest. The next few days are going to be a nightmare for this family." She turned and walked away. I watched her go, feeling nothing but a vast emptiness. Dinner was served, but nobody ate. Arthur took 2 bites of steak and put his fork down. Carol stared blankly into space. Jason was glued to his iPhone, texting furiously and taking calls out on the patio. I noticed that every time the phone buzzed, his jaw clenched. Around 9 p.m., he came up to the bedroom. As soon as the door closed, he walked toward me. Instinctively, I took a step back. "Did you get scared today, Elle?" he asked, his voice deep, feigning concern. I looked at him, fighting to keep my face neutral. Anyone would be terrified hearing their husband burn to death. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I never thought I'd see the day I'd be mourning my own death." "Ellen, I think someone is out to get me." A bitter laugh echoed in my head. "Someone isn't out to get you. You started this twisted game." But out loud, I just said, "I just hope the police figure it out soon." "I'm exhausted." He looked at me, a dark shadow crossing his eyes before nodding. "Get some sleep." I didn't sleep a wink. The wind howled through the oak trees outside, amplifying my anxiety. Through the window, I saw the light on the balcony off his home office was still on. He was awake again. Near 1 a.m., my phone buzzed lightly. It was an SMS from an unknown number. "If you want to know who died in your husband's place, be at the diner across from the hospital at 7 a.m. tomorrow. Come alone. Tell no one." My stomach dropped. I read the text 3 times. Was it the mistress? My gut said no. I glanced toward the balcony. Jason was still out there, pacing and talking on the phone, completely unaware that another door in this nightmare was about to open. I deleted the text, slipped the phone under my pillow, and closed my eyes. I was no longer just scared. I felt a cold, calculated anticipation. Starting tomorrow, I wouldn't just be the prey. I was going to hunt. I woke up at 5 a.m. The New York sky was still shrouded in mist, and the bedroom felt unusually chilly. Jason was asleep, facing away from me. In the dim light, his face looked peaceful, as if the horrors of the last 24 hours hadn't touched him. If it weren't for the deleted text, I might have convinced myself I was losing my mind. I slipped out of bed, tiptoeing so the floorboards wouldn't creak. In the bathroom, I washed my face with freezing water to snap myself awake. The unknown number's text burned in my memory. 7. Alone. The diner. Whoever sent it knew my schedule, and knew I was close to the hospital. If I didn't go, I might never know the truth. If I did go, I couldn't guarantee I'd walk out safely. I threw on jeans and a light trench coat and grabbed my purse. Downstairs, Carol was already up, brewing coffee. She looked up. "Where are you going so early?" I kept my voice light, going to grab some fresh bagels for breakfast. She nodded and didn't pry. Her brain was probably completely consumed by her son. I drove out of the estate under the pale dawn sky, my pulse accelerating with every mile. The diner was right across from County General. It was a greasy spoon, mostly empty at this hour. I grabbed a booth in the far corner, keeping my back to the window. At exactly 7 a.m., a middle-aged man slid into the booth across from me. He looked to be in his late 50s, thin, weather-beaten, with sharp, exhausted eyes. He didn't order coffee. He just stared at me. "You're Ellen?" I nodded, unable to hide my defensiveness. "You sent the text." He reached into his worn leather jacket, pulled out a photograph, and slid it across the Formica table. I looked at it, and my breath caught. It was a young man with a slight smile, but I instantly recognized the shirt he was wearing. It was a bespoke dress shirt Jason had worn to a gala last year. "The man who burned in that car yesterday was my nephew," the man said, his voice like gravel. "His name was Mark." I was speechless. "Why was your nephew wearing my husband's clothes? Why was he driving his car?" He offered a grim, humorless smile. "Because someone paid him to die in his place." The words hit me like a physical blow. I pressed my lips together to stop them from trembling. "Who?" He looked me dead in the eye. "Your husband." I felt the ground drop beneath me. Even though I was prepared for anything, hearing it confirmed by a stranger tore at whatever was left of my sanity. "What are you talking about?" I whispered. "Jason met with Mark 2 weeks ago. Mark was drowning in gambling debts. Loan sharks were threatening to break his legs. Jason offered to pay off his debts in exchange for a job. Wear the clothes in the ID photo, drive an SUV registered to Jason's LLC, and stage a crash up in the Catskills." I shuddered. "Do you have proof?" He sighed, pulled out an old Android phone, and hit play. Jason's voice filled the space between us, negotiating the morbid details of the fake crash with Mark. I listened, my ears ringing, a lump of lead in my throat. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, my voice cracking. His eyes grew red. "Because I don't want Mark to have died for nothing. Jason planned to use my nephew's staged accident as a smokescreen for something else." "What else?" He leaned in, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Yesterday morning, before the crash, Mark heard Jason on the phone with his girlfriend. He wasn't just faking his death. He was planning to murder you on that trip." I squeezed my eyes shut, gasping for air. Mark's desperation, his horrible death, and my own life, they were all tied together in a plot of unimaginable cruelty. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "My nephew is dead." Pain contorted his face. But I refused to let the bastard who set him up walk away. "You're his target. If you die, his crimes get buried forever." I gripped the edge of the table. "What do you need me to do?" "Cooperate with me. Testify. Let's drag this all into the light. I've already handed my proof to the detectives, but your testimony about the murder plot and the audio you must have is the nail in the coffin." I fell silent. My mind flashed to Carol sobbing in the ER, Arthur's broken posture, and Jason, the man who was once my entire world. If I did what this man asked, my life as I knew it would detonate. But if I didn't, Mark died for nothing. I'd live looking over my shoulder forever. And that Catskill ravine would still be waiting for me. I looked at him and slowly nodded. "Okay." He studied my face for a long moment, as if committing it to memory, then stood up. "The NYPD detectives will contact you soon. Watch your back, Ellen. Jason isn't going to go down without a fight." He turned and walked out. I was left alone with a cold cup of diner coffee. Outside, morning rush hour had begun. The hospital across the street was a hive of activity, completely indifferent to my silent war for survival. I drove back to the estate, forcing my face into a mask of serene normalcy. In the living room, Jason was talking quietly with his parents. Seeing me walk in with a bag of bagels, he offered his trademark tender smile. "You're back." I looked at him, a hurricane raging inside me, but just nodded. Breakfast was suffocating. Arthur barely touched his food. Carol just stirred her coffee. Jason played the doting husband, offering me cream cheese, asking if my stomach felt better. Every single gesture made my skin crawl. Right around noon, my phone chimed. A text from the unknown number. "We have enough. Get ready. They're bringing your husband in first." My pulse skyrocketed. I glanced toward the patio. Jason was out there, phone pressed to his ear, a faint, arrogant smirk on his face. He probably thought he still held all the cards. I realized then that this wasn't just survival anymore. It was war. A war between truth and greed. Between a woman who used to be submissive and a man willing to trade lives for money and freedom. That night, while everyone slept, I stood in the dark bedroom, my hand resting on my stomach. For the first time in 5 years, I didn't feel despair over my empty womb. I felt a fierce, burning resolve. If I survived this, I was going to live on my own terms. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But from the moment I left that diner, Jason and I were officially enemies. I barely slept. The wind rattling the balcony doors made me jump. I lay facing away from Jason, listening to his deep, rhythmic breathing. It was psychotic how easily he slept. The man I had shared a bed with for 5 years was a literal monster. Just before dawn, my phone lit up. A short text. The detectives are bringing Jason in at 9 a.m. I stared at the screen, then locked it. The fear was gone. I felt like I was standing on the threshold of a new life. On one side, a fake, subservient marriage. On the other, the brutal truth. Jason woke up late. By the time he opened his eyes, I was already dressed, sitting on the edge of the bed scrolling through the news. "You're up early?" he mumbled, stretching. "Couldn't sleep." He sat up and studied me. He smiled. "You've lost weight this week." I didn't answer. I lost weight from terror, from disgust, from having to act like I don't know you're trying to kill me. I just murmured, "It's been a stressful week." Downstairs, Arthur was already nursing a black coffee. Carol looked like a ghost, deep purple bags under her eyes. She hadn't recovered. Arthur looked at Jason. "Have the detectives called you back, son?" Jason hesitated for a split second before shaking his head. "No, Dad. It'll probably take them a few days to sort out the identity theft." I looked down into my mug to hide my eyes. I knew he was lying. And he didn't know I knew. At 8:45 a.m., while we were sitting in the living room, the doorbell rang. The housekeeper opened it. 2 NYPD detectives in cheap suits stood on the porch. "Is Jason Miller home?" The room went dead silent. Carol dropped her coffee spoon. Arthur stood up abruptly. Jason froze for a long, agonizing moment before slowly rising. "That's me." The lead detective pulled out a piece of paper. "Mr. Miller, we need you to come down to the precinct. We have a few inconsistencies regarding the fatal accident we need to clear up." Carol went pale and grabbed Jason's arm. "Officers, why are you taking him again?" "He wasn't even in the car," the detective replied flatly. "That's exactly what we need to clarify, ma'am." Jason turned to look at his father, then at me. His gaze lingered on me. I saw the paranoia flare in his eyes. He was starting to suspect. Not that his plan had failed, but that I, the wife he thought he controlled, might know something. "I'll be right back." "Don't worry, Mom." "Dad," he said smoothly. Carol burst into tears. "Tell them everything, honey. You didn't do anything wrong." I stood behind her, watching the detectives escort Jason to an unmarked Crown Victoria. When the car doors slammed shut, I felt the invisible noose around my neck suddenly loosen. The house fell into a heavy silence. Arthur sank into his leather armchair. Carol paced, praying under her breath. I excused myself and went upstairs. In the familiarity of the bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and turned my phone on. It rang almost instantly. Unknown number. "Ellen. They're interviewing Jason right now. He's denying everything," Mark's uncle said. "Get ready. They're going to call you in any minute." "I'm ready," I said quietly. I looked up at our framed wedding photo on the wall. Jason in his tailored tux, me in my white gown. We looked so happy. Nobody could have guessed that behind those smiles, I'd be subpoenaed to testify against him. At noon, my phone rang again. It was the precinct. "Mrs. Miller? We need you to come down to the station immediately." I looked at the bedroom door. Downstairs, I could hear Carol sobbing. I took a deep breath. "I'm on my way." I lied to my mother-in-law, telling her I was going to the pharmacy to pick up her anxiety meds. She didn't question it. I walked out of that mansion on my own 2 feet, without looking back. At the precinct, an officer led me into a sterile interrogation room. Jason was sitting at the metal table, flanked by a lawyer. When he saw me walk in, his face hardened. He clearly hadn't expected them to bring me in. A detective leaned against the wall. "Mrs. Miller, we asked you here to corroborate some timelines. We expect your full cooperation." Jason snapped, his voice icing over. "Ellen, what are you doing here?" I looked him dead in the eyes. I felt completely calm, because there was nothing left to hide. I reached into my purse, pulled out the small USB drive, and set it on the metal table. This is the recording of your phone call with your mistress the other night. Jason's face drained of color. He shot up from his chair. What the hell are you talking about? The detective ordered him to sit down, grabbed the USB, and plugged it into a laptop. The audio played. Every cold, calculated word filled the small room. Once she's dead, the estate and all the money will be yours. Jason looked like he was going to vomit, the veins in his neck strained. I continued, my voice shaking slightly but cutting through the silence. The person who died in your place was Mark. You hired him to fake your death. I laid it all out. The diner, the uncle, the audio of Jason making the deal with Mark. With every sentence I spoke, Jason shrank a little more into his chair. Finally, he let out a deranged, bitter laugh. And you believe a stranger over your own husband? I stared at him for a long time. In that room, the man I had loved evaporated into thin air. I believed you right up until I heard you planning my murder with my own ears. The room fell silent. The lead detective turned to Jason. Mr. Miller, with this evidence, the lies end here. I suggest you consult your attorney. Jason hung his head, staring at his handcuffed wrists. When he finally looked up, the anger was gone. There was only the hollow desperation of a trapped animal. I stood up, my legs trembling. Jason, I didn't want you to die, but I wasn't going to let you kill me so you could get rich. He looked at me, and for a fraction of a second, I saw something resembling regret in his eyes, but it was far too late. I walked out of the interrogation room, my heart hammering. In the hallway, the harsh fluorescent lights blinded me. I stood there for a minute, feeling like I had just amputated an infected limb to save my life. I didn't know what would happen behind that door. I only knew that the moment I put that USB on the table, my marriage was officially dead. In exchange, I got to live. I left the precinct just as the sun was setting. The orange light stretched across the concrete sidewalks of the city. I stopped, breathing in the polluted city air like it was oxygen from a mountaintop. I had to learn how to breathe again. Behind me, in that building, the man who was my protector was now being booked for conspiracy to commit murder. My phone buzzed. A text from Mark's uncle. Thank you. Mark can rest in peace now. I stared at it and replied, I'm sorry it came too late to save him. I hailed a yellow cab. During the ride back to Westchester, my mind was a blank slate. Out the window, the familiar streets passed by like a movie I was no longer starring in. The route we took to work, the bakery where he bought my birthday cakes, they belonged to a past life now. When I opened the front door, Carol was pacing the foyer. Seeing me, she rushed over, frantic. Ellen, why did you take so long? Where's Jason? I froze. I had rehearsed this in the cab, but looking at her, my throat tightened. Jason is at the police precinct, Mom. She stopped, grabbing my arm. Again? Why didn't he come back with you? I looked at the floor. I couldn't lie anymore. Because the detectives found new evidence. He's being held in a holding cell. They're charging him. The words hit her like a physical blow. Carol stumbled backward, clutching her chest, and slumped against the entryway console. What are you saying? Arthur walked out from his study. Hearing my last sentence, he stopped dead. Charging him? With what? The air in the grand foyer became suffocating. I knew that what I was about to say would destroy this family forever. Slowly, I told them everything. The late-night phone call, the USB recording, Mark dying in Jason's place, and the plot to murder me in the Catskills. With every word, Arthur's face aged a decade, and Carol's turned the color of ash. When I finished, a graveyard silence filled the mansion. Arthur sank onto the stairs, burying his face in his trembling hands. After an eternity, he rasped, He wanted to kill you? I nodded, hot tears spilling down my cheeks. Yes. If Mark hadn't taken that car, the body on the morgue table today would be mine. Carol unleashed a guttural wail. She didn't scream at the heavens or beat her chest like she did at the hospital. She collapsed onto the marble floor, sobbing like someone who had lost her soul. Oh God, he's a monster. How could he do that to his own wife? Arthur looked up at me, his eyes filled with a soul-crushing shame. Ellen, I am so sorry. I failed as a father. I shook my head, my throat burning. It's not your fault, Arthur. I never thought he'd become this either. Suddenly, Carol looked up, her eyes bloodshot and desperate. Do you still love him, Ellen? The question squeezed my heart. I loved the Jason from 5 years ago. The decent man who held my hand. But the man who plotted to drug me and throw me off a cliff? I loved him, I said honestly. But now, I just want to survive. Carol buried her face in her hands and wept. That night, the 7,500 square foot estate was dead silent. No footsteps in the hall, no Jason calling my name, just Arthur's heavy sighs from the study and Carol's muffled sobbing behind her bedroom door. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling an immense void. On one side, a family destroyed by their own son. On the other, me, the wife, who put him behind bars to save her own life. I didn't know who was hurting more. I just knew it was over. Close to midnight, a text came in. Jason has been formally indicted for conspiracy to commit murder, manslaughter, and wire fraud. Arraignment is tomorrow. I read that. Now. And even though I was prepared, the word indicted felt like a physical tear in my chest. The next morning, I was called back to the DA's office to sign statements. When I got back to the house, it was dark. Carol was sitting alone in the massive living room. She stood up and walked toward me. I braced myself, expecting anger, but she just looked at me with hollow eyes. Pack your bags. I froze. What? She turned away, hiding a sob. This house isn't a sanctuary anymore. You're the wife of a man going to trial. The press is going to descend on us. You'll suffer here. Go back to your parents' place in Queens. I swallowed hard. She wasn't kicking me out. In her own twisted way, she was protecting me. What about Jason? She closed her eyes, tears leaking out. He has to pay for what he did. I can't save him. I went upstairs and packed 2 suitcases. Every item I touched was a ghost. The sweater he bought me for Christmas. The scarf I wrapped around his neck when it snowed, all fragments of a shattered illusion. When I brought my bags downstairs, Arthur was waiting by the door. He looked at me for a long time. Ellen, I have no right to ask you to stay. But whatever happens, you will always be my daughter-in-law. I bowed my head. Thank you, Arthur. Carol handed me a thick manila envelope. There's some cash in here. Take it for your expenses. It's the least we can do. I shook my head. I can't take this. She shoved it into my hands, her voice breaking. Take it. Please, let me have some peace of mind. I didn't fight her. I hugged her. For the first time in 5 years, the critical mother-in-law and the infertile daughter-in-law held each other like 2 women falling into the exact same abyss. When I walked out those double oak doors, I knew I was leaving a whole life behind. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. I dragged my suitcases down the long driveway, feeling strangely weightless, like a boulder had been lifted off my chest. I didn't know what tomorrow looked like, but I knew I was no longer Jason Miller's wife. I was just Ellen, a woman who traded her husband, her mansion, and her past for the right to breathe. I arrived at my parents' row house in Queens late that night. The narrow street looked exactly the same, illuminated by amber street lamps casting shadows on the brick facades. The smell of someone's late dinner mixed with the familiar urban air, grounding me. My mom was sitting on the porch, fanning herself with a magazine. Seeing me dragging suitcases up the sidewalk, she jumped up, eyes wide. Ellen, what are you doing here at this hour? Before I could say a word, the tears came. I dropped the bags, ran up the steps, and buried my face in her shoulder. I'm home, Mom. She froze for a second, then wrapped her arms around me tight. I felt her frail, shaking hands stroke my hair. Why are you crying? Where's Jason? Why are you alone? The commotion woke my dad. He came to the screen door, saw me, and stopped. Ellen? I wiped my face, trying to breathe. Yeah, I'm coming to stay with you guys for a while. It was a simple sentence, but my parents instantly knew my marriage had imploded. My mom didn't press for details. She pulled me inside and made me a cup of hot tea. My dad sat across from me at the worn kitchen table, looked at me for a long time, and said softly, "Tell us what happened." I told them everything. The 3 a.m. recording, the Catskills murder plot, Mark dying in the decoy car, Jason's arrest, the indictment. With every detail, my dad's face grew darker. Beside me, my mom gripped her tea mug so hard her knuckles turned white. When I finished, a suffocating silence settled over the small kitchen. Finally, my dad let out a ragged sigh. Jesus Christ. He really tried to do that to you? My mom broke down, a muffled, agonizing sob. My baby, he almost killed you. Why did you have to go through that? Sitting between my parents, looking down at my hands, I felt like I had walked through a pitch-black tunnel just to find my way back to this modest kitchen table. That night, I slept in my childhood bedroom. The same faded yellow wallpaper, the same twin bed that squeaked when I moved. It was so simple it made my chest ache. I stared at the ceiling, Jason's face in the interrogation room flashing behind my eyelids. I didn't hate him the way I did initially. I just felt a bone-deep exhaustion, like a survivor washed up on a beach after a hurricane. Over the next few weeks, I was called into the district attorney's office multiple times to prepare for trial. My parents drove me back and forth. My mom held my hand in the courthouse hallways, holding on so tight it felt like she was terrified the world would drag me away again. One afternoon, leaving the courthouse, I bumped into Arthur. He had lost a shocking amount of weight. His tailored suit hung off his shoulders. Seeing me, he hesitated, then approached. Ellen, hi, Arthur. He looked at me, his lips moving a few times before he managed to speak. I just wanted to ask, do you still hate him? I stayed silent. Hate him? I had hated him so much I couldn't breathe. But now, after the adrenaline faded, there was only a dull ache. I don't want him dead, Arthur, but I can't carry his sins for him. Arthur nodded, his eyes watering. I understand. I don't blame you. He turned and walked away. Watching his hunched back, a wave of sadness washed over me. All parents love their children, but some children veer so far off the path, there's no saving them. A few days later, the DA informed me that Jason's mistress had been apprehended trying to board a flight to Mexico. Her identity became public. She was a junior VP at Jason's tech firm. Their affair had been going on for over a year. She was the one who pressured him into the scheme, pushing him to fake his death and eliminate me to claim the life insurance and the estate. Hearing that, I just sat in silence. For over a year, while I was injecting my stomach with hormones and swallowing Carol's bitter remarks about my infertility, my husband was building a bloody exit strategy. Sarah came to visit me on a rainy Tuesday. She hugged me the second I opened the door. You are so lucky to be alive, Elle. I gave a tired smile. Yeah, I'm starting to realize that. She stayed for hours, gossiping about college friends to distract me. Before she left, she grabbed my hands. So, you're filing for divorce, right? I looked out at the rain-slicked street. It's not even a question anymore. It's a necessity. I had already signed the papers. My marriage was dead in the eyes of the law, just as it was in my heart. A week later, I went to a routine checkup my doctor had scheduled. The OB/GYN called me into her office. After looking at my blood panels, she peered over her glasses, stunned. Ellen, do you know you're pregnant? I froze. The humming in my ears drowned out the city traffic outside. Excuse me? You're about 5 weeks along. It's very early. I sank into the chair. A baby. It arrived right as my marriage burned to the ground, right as its father was sitting in Rikers Island awaiting trial. That night, I told my parents. My mom hugged me, sobbing. My dad sat quietly for a long time before asking, "Do you want to keep it?" I placed a hand over my flat stomach, feeling the weight of that fragile, terrifying spark of life. A piece of me, and, unfortunately, a piece of Jason. Yes. The baby is innocent. My dad nodded resolutely. Then we'll help you raise him. I broke down. For the first time, I wasn't crying out of terror or anger. I cried out of sheer gratitude that I had a safe harbor. I didn't tell my in-laws. I didn't know if the news would bring them joy or just more agony, but I knew this baby was the universe's ultimate test for me. Outside, the New York wind howled. But inside, a tiny life was quietly taking root. The day of the trial, I attended as the primary victim. It was drizzling, just like the day Sarah visited. My mom held my hand from the moment we left the house in Queens. "Don't be scared. We're right here," she whispered. I nodded. In my womb, I swore I felt a tiny flutter, a reminder that I was no longer alone. The courtroom in Manhattan felt massive and freezing. In the gallery across the aisle, I saw my in-laws. Carol had aged 20 years. Her hair was entirely white, and she looked frail. When she saw me, her eyes reddened. I gave a slight nod. She returned it faintly. Then, the bailiffs brought Jason in. I stopped breathing. The man who used to strut around in Tom Ford suits was now swallowed by a baggy orange jumpsuit. He was gaunt, his cheekbones jutting out, his skin pasty from months in a cell. When his eyes locked onto mine, he stopped. I saw shock, profound regret, and finally, absolute despair. I didn't look away. I stared back, much calmer than I ever thought possible. The trial was swift. The DA played the recording. They had my testimony, the uncle's testimony, the forensic reports from the Catskills, and finally Jason's own signed confession. When the judge allowed him to speak, Jason stood up, his hands shaking in their cuffs. He looked at his parents first, then turned to me. "Ellen, I'm sorry." 3 words. But they sounded like a lifetime shattering. "I let greed make me insane. I didn't just betray you. I tried to end your life. I don't deserve to be a husband. I don't deserve to be a son." Carol wailed into Arthur's chest. Arthur closed his eyes, tears tracking through his deep wrinkles. Jason's voice broke. "Ellen, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just ask, if one day. About the baby." He choked on his words. He knew. I realized he had figured it out, probably from the medical records the defense had to review. "Please, just let me know, even if it's just once in my life." I didn't nod. I didn't shake my head. I just looked at him. In that moment, the hatred was gone, the love was gone. There was only a gaping void where he used to be. The gavel fell. Jason was sentenced to 25 years to life in a maximum security state penitentiary. When the judge read the sentence, Carol collapsed. Arthur held her up, the final embrace of 2 people whose world had just officially ended. I turned around and walked out the heavy oak doors. I didn't have the stomach to watch anymore. The day my divorce was finalized, the sun was blindingly bright. We didn't exchange a single word, 2 signatures, and I was free. As I left the lawyer's office, I saw him being escorted back to the transport van. He turned to look at me one last time. There was no calculation, no malice in his eyes anymore. Just infinite sorrow. I turned the corner before my tears could fall. A few days later, Arthur drove out to Queens. He looked frail, leaning heavily on a cane. He stood in the living room for a minute before speaking. "Ellen, I have a favor to ask." I poured him a cup of coffee. "Jason told me about the baby. I'm not here to ask you to come back or anything crazy. I just beg you. When the child grows up, please let his grandmother and me see him, just as our grandson." His voice broke. "It's the only thing we have left." I stared into my coffee cup, remembering Carol forcing that envelope of cash into my hands, her trembling hug, her broken face at the courthouse. "Yes, when he's born, I'll let you know." Arthur stood up and bowed his head to me. "Thank you, Ellen." When he left, I stood on the porch for a long time. Some ties, even when severed, leave a thread just thin enough to remember they existed. Time passed slowly, but with a bizarre sense of peace. I used the money from my savings and a small loan to open a little neighborhood bodega, deli down the street in Queens. It was enough to support my parents and the baby. Sarah visited often, joking, "After the hurricane, you finally get a sunburn." I'd laugh, rubbing my belly. The sun didn't burn anymore. It just kept me warm. The night my water broke, it was pouring rain, just like the night I fled the mansion. But this time, my tears were tears of life. When I heard the first wail echo in the delivery room, my heart burst. Ah, boy. My son. I named him Matthew, hoping he would grow up to be a man of clarity and truth. A week later, Arthur and Carol came to the hospital. Carol, shaking violently, held the swaddled baby in her arms. Her tears dropped onto his tiny blanket. "Hi, sweet boy. I'm your grandma." I didn't correct her. In that room, she just needed to be a grandmother. I didn't tell Jason the birth date. I only asked Arthur to pass along a message. "Your son is born. He is healthy. I will raise him to be a good man." The rest of our lives, we stay on our own paths. I don't know what Jason felt in his cell that night, but I knew my life had completely turned the page. I wasn't anyone's trophy wife. I wasn't the barren daughter-in-law of a wealthy estate. I was Ellen, a mother. Sometimes, late at night, with Matthew sleeping on my chest, I'd recount everything that happened. Not to torture myself, but to remind myself that I stared death in the face and walked away under my own power. Life can strip a woman of her youth, her trust, her marriage. But as long as she's breathing, as long as she has a reason to fight, she can always rebuild. And I did. 3 years later, I opened the deli on a sunny Tuesday. The morning light spilled over the counter. Matthew was sitting by the door, clutching a beat-up teddy bear, humming a jingle from a TV commercial. He had my big, bright eyes, but his nose was identical to Jason's. Every time I noticed it, my heart would give a tiny ache. But I quickly reminded myself the past was dead. "Mommy, can I have Oreos today?" Matthew ran over and hugged my leg. "If you eat all your broccoli at dinner, Mommy will get you Oreos." I smiled. He grinned, showing his little teeth, and ran off to chase the bodega cat. My days were aggressively normal, opening the shop, cooking for my parents and Matthew, working the register, and locking up early to read Matthew bedtime stories. There were no more Hamptons galas, no 7,000, 500-square-foot mansions, no fake corporate smiles. Just my son yelling, "Mom," when he woke up from a nap. One rainy afternoon, my dad called out from the front of the store. "Ellen, someone's here for you." I looked up. Arthur was standing by the chips aisle. He was much thinner, his shoulders completely slumped, using a walker. He stood there for a while before walking toward the counter. "Hi, Ellen." "Hi, Arthur." Matthew peeked out from behind my legs, eyeing the stranger. "This is Matthew," I said softly. "Say hi to your grandpa." Arthur froze, staring at the boy unblinking, his lips trembling. "You're Matthew." I nodded. Matthew waved shyly. "Hi, Grandpa." That one word was enough to break the old man. Tears spilled down his cheeks. He reached a shaking hand out to pat Matthew's head, but pulled it back, afraid of scaring him. "I just came to see you." I invited him into the back room and poured him coffee. He set a plastic shopping bag on the table, some Hot Wheels and Legos. "Please, Arthur, you don't need to do this. It's not for you. It's for him." I stayed quiet. A moment later, he spoke slowly. "Jason is doing his time. The first few years, he was a ghost. But when he found out the boy was born, he started taking responsibility. He's in the prison vocational program. Works in the auto shop, he says. If he ever gets parole, all he wants is to know you two are okay." I felt a slight pinch in my chest, but nothing more. Arthur looked at me. "I won't ask you to forgive him. He burned his own house down. I don't want you to spend the rest of your life poisoned by hate." I met his eyes. "I don't hate him anymore, Arthur. I just don't feel anything for him at all." He nodded slowly. When he left, Matthew ran after him and handed him a lollipop from the candy rack. "Here, Grandpa." Arthur stopped, took the candy with a shaking hand, and whispered a thank you. He walked out into the New York rain. I watched him go from the doorway. That night I asked Matthew, "Did you like Grandpa?" "Yeah." "But he looked sad," my 3-year-old said, with an innocence that struck me to my core. Months later, Arthur forwarded me a letter from Jason. The handwriting was messy, no longer the crisp, arrogant cursive he used to sign checks with. "Ellen, I don't dare ask for forgiveness. I just want to tell you that I finally understand what it means to pay for your sins. Every night in this cell, I dream of you and the boy, but I know it's a dream I have no right to. I just hope you're safe." I read the letter and slowly folded it. I didn't reply. Not out of spite, but because our timelines had permanently diverged. Some shattered glass can't be glued back together. On Matthew's first day of kindergarten, he refused to let go of my hand. "Mommy, come inside with me." "Mommy will wait right here by the door," I promised. He bit his lip, his eyes glassy, and walked into the classroom. When the door closed, I stood in the hallway feeling like a piece of my heart had just walked away. That night, Sarah came over to the apartment above the deli. "Ellen, have you ever thought about getting back out there? Dating?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, a woman is allowed to have a second act. You deserve to be happy." I laughed. "I am happy, Sarah. She looked at me, realizing I meant it. Yeah, happy your own way. That night, holding a sleeping Matthew, I felt a massive wave of peace. I no longer dreaded the dark. I didn't jump at ringing phones. I didn't live in a cold, echoing mansion. I lived in a cramped, noisy Queens apartment, but it was warm. Scars never fully fade, but you learn to live with them until they stop aching. Jason was a scar. Matthew was the warmth that healed it every day. I walked out of hell on my own 2 feet, and now I was walking a quiet path, free of mansions and millions, but rich in the freedom to just be a mother. 18 years later, on a gorgeous, sunny May afternoon, Matthew came sprinting into the deli. "Mom, I got in!" he yelled, waving a thick envelope. I dropped my wiping rag and ran around the counter, my hands shaking worse than his. "NYU?" "Yeah, computer science." I threw my arms around him, burying my face in his chest. He was a head taller than me now and cried like a baby. That evening, Matthew sat next to me on the fire escape, looking out over the city. "Mom, I want to ask you something. What was my dad really like?" I went quiet. "Your dad was once the person I trusted more than anyone in the world. Are you still mad at him?" I smiled softly. "I used to be. Now, I just see him for what he is." I turned to my son. His jawline was so much like Jason's, it was uncanny. "Do you want to see him?" He nodded seriously. "I don't want to yell at him. I just want to look him in the eye and know where I came from." I took a deep breath. "If you want to go, I won't stop you." The drive up to the state penitentiary in upstate New York was quiet, with a light drizzle hitting the windshield. When Jason was brought into the visitation room, I barely recognized him. He was completely gray, his posture stooped, his face deeply lined from 2 decades behind bars. But when he saw Matthew, his eyes lit up like floodlights. "Hi, Dad," Matthew said, giving a small nod. Those 2 words absolutely broke Jason. He put his head on the cinderblock table and sobbed. "You're so tall. Are you doing okay?" "I'm going to NYU in the fall," Matthew said quietly. "We're doing great." I stood a few feet back, watching them. All the terror, the plotting, the audio recording, the Catskills, it all felt like it belonged to a different lifetime. Jason looked up at me through the plexiglass partition. "Ellen, you raised an incredible man." I just nodded, because he's my son. Before the guard signaled time was up, Matthew stood up. "I don't know what was in your head back then, Dad. But I hope, from now on, you just try to be a better person." Jason nodded frantically, wiping his face on his orange sleeve. "I promise you. I promise." Driving back to the city, Matthew looked over from the passenger seat. "Mom, I get why you chose the life we have now." I smiled. "You don't blame me for it taking you away from that money? I've never been more proud of you." Those words made my chest tighten. I always thought of myself as just a lucky survivor, but to my son, I was a mother worth being proud of, and that was enough for a lifetime. The day Matthew married Lucy, a sweet girl from a working-class family in Brooklyn, they had a simple backyard reception. Arthur, now in a wheelchair, sat quietly in the corner, watching. Carol had passed away a few years prior. During the toasts, Matthew walked over and knelt next to my chair. "Mom, thank you for raising me to be a real man." I pulled him up, tears streaming down my face. "Living a decent life is the best gift you could ever give me." A year later, my granddaughter was born. Matthew ran into my apartment yelling, "Mom, I'm a dad!" I held the tiny, squirming baby girl in my arms, my hands shaking. Life is a bizarre circle. I was a woman whose husband mapped out her murder. I gave birth alone, terrified of the world. And now, I was holding my granddaughter, surrounded by laughter and happy tears. Arthur died a few years later. I visited him in hospice before he passed. I forgave him, and he forgave me. Jason eventually made parole. Arthur's lawyer told me he moved to a small town upstate and opened a modest auto repair shop. He lived like a ghost. We never saw each other again. Some doors, once closed, are meant to stay closed forever. One late summer afternoon, sitting on the porch of the Queen's house with my granddaughter asleep on my chest, I felt a profound, unbreakable peace. I had walked through the fire, I had stood on the edge of a ravine, but I survived, completing a circle of unimaginable pain only to return to the simplest, most beautiful thing: family. My name is Ellen. I loved. I was betrayed. I almost died. I gave birth in the ashes of my old life. But I stood back up, kept walking, and kept the light burning for the generations that came after.